on the north end of what's left of the Reading Viaduct. The Reading Viaduct is an awesome structure that makes its way through a little less now than a mile or so of Philadelphia. And it has a powerful set of stories to tell. And that's going to be the purpose of today's walk, which is to walk this viaduct structure and kind of tell the stories. And there's really a series of stories. These stories concern entrepreneurship, design, planning, the power of nature, the history of industry. All these different stories really are kind of tied up in with this structure. They come alive on this structure. There's a continuing story that we'll talk about that's going on as we speak. But briefly, I'm standing basically at what would be considered 9th Street and Fairmount Avenue in Philadelphia. Now, in the history of transportation, everything changed when trains were invented in the early 1800s. And so Philadelphia being the big center of the United States in the 1800s was one place where train transportation became a real focal point of business and growth. And so when railroads started to become built, there was a company called the Philadelphia, Germantown, and Norristown. Its nickname was called the Pigeon, which sort of has P, G, and N in it. And so the Pigeon Railroad is what ran in the area of where we are today. So when trains came into being in around the mid-1800s in this area, the Pigeon ran like from way north of here into the city, and it basically followed at grade 9th Street. So when the Pigeon was running, you had trains running on the ground and following 9th Street. If you go to a street called Willow Street, you can actually, that's maybe a little less than a mile or so from where we are, you can actually still find some old rails that date back to the time that the trains were traveling at grade level. So the Pigeon ran its trains. Philadelphia continued to grow and grow and grow into the 1800s. The Industrial Revolution was a powerful change agent. Philadelphia was at the center of that Industrial Revolution. So train travel, both both industrial and then for later on moving passengers, became more and more important. So the Pigeon was running frequently. But think about it for a second. If you're running trains at street level, this is before cars are invented, so you still have people on horse and buggy and things like that. So as the trains would come to every intersection, a lot of times they would just have to stop to let people cross or a horse and buggy cross. It was certainly anything but express at the time that these trains were traveling on an undedicated line where it was nothing but the train running. So in the later 1800s, the Reading Railroad, so another railroad company, the Reading, which became a large railroad company, came into play, and they're the ones that ended up taking over the area that we're standing, and then they became the rail carrier over here. So as industry grew, Philadelphia grew, and also the Reading Railroad's chief competitor grew, being the Pennsylvania Railroad. The Reading Railroad decided to work with the city of Philadelphia to say that if we create an elevated viaduct, so you've heard of an elevated structure which could go over 9th Street and basically carry trains and trains only from North Philly directly into the city. So a plan was hatched to take the same train line that ran along 9th Street, elevate it onto a dedicated structure that would make its way into the center of the city. So over a period of time in the late 1800s, the Reading Railroad worked on a very, very grand plan to create what's now called the Reading Viaduct. And so where we're standing now, all around me was a viaduct that came from the point that we'll show in a little bit, north of me, followed right over to where I'm standing, and then made its way into the city. The train that I'll let pass, so the SEPTA train that just passed us, that'll come into this story about 100 years after this viaduct was created, because this viaduct ended up going out of circulation when the railroad section that you saw that train just travel on, when that came into being, roughly in 1984, when something called the commuter tunnel was built. So for about 100 years, the Reading Railroad, riding its trains on the Reading Viaduct, was really what took place over here, and it also became one of the main commuter lines for people from suburban Philadelphia, from places like Trenton, New Jersey, because if you head north, you can feed into all these other areas. So this is a hugely busy area of train travel. In 1893, the Reading Terminal was built. So the Reading Terminal, which is just about a mile or so from where we're standing right now, that was the terminal, the terminus of the Reading Railroad in Center City, Philadelphia. So where we're standing right now, if we take this south that way for another mile, we would come into the old train shed of the Reading Terminal. So that was built in 1893, and during that same time, there was the viaduct was built. It wasn't until about 1912 that the fully finished viaduct, lacking any kind of temporary structures, traveled directly from where I am right now straight into the train shed of the Reading Terminal. So that century or so of train travel had a sudden halt in 1984 with the building of the commuter tunnel. So before we take our walk, what happens when you build a grand old elevated structure? You run trains on it. Then all of a sudden one day you say, power's off, trains go over here, trains are done, but then you leave the structure in place. And that's going to be the story that unfolds, which is really fascinating, that this is still in existence. And that's the walk we're going to take to check out, what has gone on this structure since 1984, when the power was turned off. So I'm standing in the same place you just saw me. I just wanted to give you the vantage point of what it looks like on the south end of the viaduct. You can see the new power station that went into play when they built the commuter tunnel. And there's very cool graffiti up here. I'll be careful a little bit here. I just wanted to scale this for you and show you. So this is, again, scaling the southern end of the viaduct. So give you a sense of where we are. You can see the newer looking SEPTA tracks. You can see a really old neighborhood that is since gentrified to a large extent in the last decade or so. But there have been families living here for generations and generations, dating way back to when this was a real factory section of the city. There's it's a Greek Orthodox or a Russian Orthodox church with the gold dome over there that still has an active congregation. So we are in an area that is kind of like a melting pot of neighborhoods. So let's make our way back up this structure. Bear with me while we climb up. Right. And let's see what this viaduct is all about. So you can see up ahead, that's called a catenary structure. Power was connected to lines that were supported by that support structure up there. So look at it up here. Who put these plants here? If you look down, you can see old railroad ties, some of the old rocks that were here. So basically, these plants put themselves here. Talk about ingenuity, talk about entrepreneurial energy, activity. You know, nobody came up here and planted these. No. There was an amazing design to create a railroad structure that then carried trains into the city, part of a grander transportation plan. But since 1984, who's been doing the planning and design? Nature has. Totally nature. How does this happen? See this tree over here? I can tell that's an oak tree. You might think, so what, an oak tree? Well, what do oaks stem from? They stem from acorns. You've all seen an acorn. Acorns are fairly large size seeds to plant. So what that means is some squirrel had to have come up on this structure. And remember, there was no soil up here, right? This is probably loaded with contaminated just dust. It had like rocks packed tightly together, wood ties, iron holding them all together. So just since 1984, a squirrel somehow gets up here, somehow has the ability to get an acorn planted up here. The acorn germinates, and you have a pretty sizable oak tree over here, which now can make nuts for other for other squirrels and other animals. So basically, nature's doing quite okay up here. Check these guys out. When you see trees that are in the cherry species, Prunus is the genus. These are tent caterpillars, real early for this time of spring. Usually they're out a little bit later, but you generally only find them on cherry trees. But those little guys walking around, they're tent caterpillars. They're gonna turn into a moth. So whereas when you had trains here, you might have had some trees and things crop up on the side. Now you have a virtual habitat that's put itself in just a matter of a few decades. And talk about design. A landscape designer who was designing a meadow or a prairie might say, hey, can anybody think of a really good grass, not too high, holds itself together even through the winter, and it also is good for wildlife. It also manages stormwater really well with its root system. A designer would take some time and would spec out a grass. Well, if you look at this grass here, this would be a grass that a designer would be making a wise choice to pick. It's called little blue stem. And this is last year's little blue stem, and still holding itself together. You know, here it is, the month of April. It's starting to grow at the grade level, but this is its late winter color, still lightly orange. A gorgeous grass, and look at it. It just basically filled itself in here, again on a place that had no soil whatsoever. Give you a view of some of these cool caterpillar guys over here. There's a big bunch of them. Aren't they cute? Newly born. There's a book that's worth checking out. It's called The World Without Us. It talks all about what would happen to our planet in the absence of people. Now that we're taking this tour in the midst of a pandemic, it's not such a far-fetched idea maybe to think about how the Earth might do if people disappeared for some reason. Well, if you want an example of how nature takes over, this is it. This is nature saying that humans, we don't really need you that much, if at all, to do our thing. Even something as harsh as an elevated structure. Remember, an elevated structure doesn't have any base to it. It doesn't have, other than the piers that hold it up. It's not connected to the soil level. So that means when it's really hot out, it gets really hot up here. When it gets really cold out, it gets really cold up here. When you're riding on a highway and you see the sign that says bridge freezes before the rest of the road, that's what happens up here. So not only is there no soil up here, but there's very, very harsh conditions. Yet look at what's happened here. We're looking at about our last opportunity for some vantage point of where the commuter tunnel starts. So right beyond this tree, you can you might get it, you might be able to see, but there's train tracks maybe about 30-50 yards away from us right now, and that's where all of SEPTA's trains that head into the city from this area, that's where they go underground. And they actually still go to where the Reading terminal is. They just hit that area subterranean. So if you don't mind glancing in the direction of the sun for a second, check this out. What you see are houses that were built not too long ago. I wouldn't call them the most tasteful in design. They're the kind of houses that people that speculate are able to put up. Pretty inexpensive, not a lot of real innovative design. But we're in an area right now, but you can tell by the center city buildings how close we are. Let alone that there's a pistol range that's kind of about 100 yards off from us. This is now becoming a hot area to live. So we're in the midst of a lot of changeover, where you still have some vacant lots, you still have some underutilized places like we're looking at right now. You have trashy areas, you have crime, and then you have gates and stuff like you're seeing over there, and you have people moving in. Spring Garden Holdings is one of the main developers that's bought up a lot of the land and a lot of the old industrial buildings, turning them into things like artist lofts, restaurants, bars, and things like that. Lots of change is taking place all around this structure. A lot of speculation also about what will become of this structure. Is this the future High Line that New York City has for Philadelphia? So as I said earlier, the Reading Railroad built the Reading Terminal building in 1893. And this area was still in the process of being finished from a construction standpoint. In about 1909, I believe, the Reading Company built this building over here, which right now is being converted, I believe, into artists' lofts. In fact, it's leasing now, as it says up at the top there. It's so they had offices in this building, and then we're going to see if we can't get inside the old train station, which was located at 9th and Spring Garden Street. So both of them went up in about 1909. So I'm inside what remains of the old train station building that provided people a train stop at 9th and Spring Garden. If you look behind, or covered with graffiti, you could tell that some real money was put into this. Some fine tile, you see granite. Like this molding area is all granite. A lot of it is still intact. When we first came in, you could tell that there used to be an elevator here with this old shaft. You would not want to be breathing in here. It does not smell appealing, but it's worth it for the visual impact. So look what we have here. First off, let's check that out. We have a veritable greenhouse. Here we are, early spring. I see a variety of species of ferns growing in a train station. Go figure. Who would have thought that ferns and spray paint cans would be what followed people after this train station treated it or cared for its last passenger in 1984. You have a microclimate in here, and it's allowing, in a shady structure like this, like intense growth of ferns and other plants. Here we have a nice view of an old steam plant. That plant was built, I believe, by Philadelphia Electric in the late 1920s. Don't hold me to that. You would think a developer would turn that into amazing loft apartments, but that thing is sealed up, loaded with asbestos. Nobody knows what to do with it. And that's because it's no longer on the grid. Philadelphia still uses steam heat in some of its buildings, and there's still active steam generation as a source of energy. But a building that used to hold huge boilers in it like that has no floors. So for a developer to come in, let alone remove all the asbestos, that developer would have to put in floors. And apparently investors have found it just much too cost prohibitive to even entertain turning that building into something that you could live in or use as office space. This, by the way, where we are, is a structure that with not like a crazy amount of effort could be reborn. The walls still look like they're largely intact. I don't see them coming apart, separating like you sometimes see in old decaying structures. So, you know, think about what you might do from a design standpoint. You know there's an elevator shaft here. So all it's missing is an elevator, which means that for people who are handicapped and can't climb steps, you have the possibility of putting an elevator right back into this building. You could leave the roof off if you were concerned with people coming in, just like there's a huge, like a relatively large homeless population that we passed by to get in here. But if you keep the roof structure off, let the plants grow, it could be quite a cool spot.
There's also stairs that we saw that go right down to 9th and Spring Garden. Now would be the time for the city or for somebody to take on this building, because it's only going to just keep decaying in place. But if it were shored up, you'd have a nice piece of history from 1912 that could serve, that could serve at the street level. And given that the future of the Reading Viaduct itself being held by something called the Old Reading Company, the city does not have access to it right now. At least to get this building preserved and then and having some cool public use might be a real amenity in this area. Now here's the stairs again that go right down to the street. So again, you have easy, wide access from a stairway standpoint, and then you have easy elevator reconnection so that anybody could get up here and enjoy a rehabilitated structure. Some of the best artists in Philadelphia are graffiti artists. And as we just saw, there's some really interesting artwork done both inside and on the outside of this building here. Here you have a nice array of staghorn sumacs coming back into the play. They're called staghorn because they're fuzzy at the top here, just like the horns of a deer, like a male deer. That's what you have going on right over here. So again, think about it. This Reading Company building is leasing now. It's going to be, middle class, upper middle class living. And then we just saw what's living right across it as we speak. So now we're crossing the Spring Garden Avenue or Spring Garden Street Bridge. So this bridge was finished, I think, in about 1912, which before that there was a temporary structure that took you from the point behind us and made its way into the Reading Terminal. So it really wasn't until about 1912 that a permanent structure was put in place, like the one we're walking on right now. Spring Garden is one of the widest streets in Philadelphia. Used to be a lot greener as a boulevard. There's a fountain, I think called the Fountain, it might be called the Fountain of Rebecca, that was relocated from a few blocks away from here, and it's hidden right now in West Fairmount Park in the Centennial District area. So this is the interesting juxtapositions that you see here. You can see a sign right beyond Percy Street that tells you that there's an active pistol range. And here's Triple Bottom Brewing, a new bar that opened up recently in 915 Spring Garden, which is now the name of this old Reading Company office building. Across the way, this 990 is one of the earlier buildings that was done by Spring Garden Holdings. I'm sorry, Arts and Crafts Holdings. So right now, it being early April, you see the plants coming back to life up here. If you've noted, the plant structure in our short walk, it has not been uniform. It's been different in different places, and it continues that way. So what you do is you have plants that are responding to the elements, they're responding to various opportunities, they might be responding to soil that might be dry in places, wetter in others, have certain chemicals in some places and not those same chemicals in others. And so you have this diverse pattern of vegetation up here. About 4 years ago or so, my nonprofit, Land Health Institute, was engaged by the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society under funding from Pew Charitable Trust, and we actually did a plant survey up here. And there had been a group that did a plant survey in about 5 years before we did ours. And when the group that did their plant survey before ours, they found about 50 species. That means 50 different species of plants growing up here on the viaduct. And remember, that's from a time that 1984, there might have been like 5 species of plants that somehow grew as weeds up here. When we did our survey, again, just about 4 years ago, we found about 75 or more plant species. So what that means is, just in a period of about 5 years, you've had 20 or 25 more species come into being up here. So you have evolution taking place as we speak on this highly industrialized remnant. So it's not just that there's plants up here, and it's not just that there's a lot of plants, there's all kinds of plants. And they just keep changing over time. So think about it. What do you think of the feel of it up here? If you were handed the redesign of this structure, what would you do? Would you cut it all down? and make it into like a manicured park? Would you copy New York City? Would you look up the High Line of New York City and take a look at a similar situation where you had an elevated structure that was left to decay, and then a lot of money was raised to redesign and make it basically a public park, public walkway. If you follow what went on there, everything was removed, right down to the structure itself, and then replaced. So all the plants were taken out. Would you do that here? Would you take down that oak tree we saw back there? Would you take down that tree over there, which is called a Polonia or an empress tree? It's a calorie pear tree that found its way up here. A few flowers left. It flowered about maybe a couple weeks ago. What do you do? Hi. Good. How you doing?
All right.
Here's the site of a pop-up bar from a couple years ago. And now you have a permanent bar that's nearby. So you have all this new housing going up, new opportunities for drinking establishments and restaurants. And I walk right back over here on the other side of the viaduct. And I still see the signs of the old industrial days. There's still light industry taking place on these streets. What do you do? Do you just try to, do you make it so that they end up having to move out and this becomes one whole area of gentrified housing? When we were walking about a half mile behind us, there was a PHA housing development. That's the Philadelphia Housing Authority. So there's, you know, people living there in subsidized housing right next to something that was redone by a developer not too long ago with super high rents, literally right next to one another. Is there a way to rebuild this structure, make it accessible to all, and still maintain the neighborhoods and the mosaic pattern that you have right now, where you have different ethnic groups living nearby? You have your PHA housing, you have your upscale housing that's going in, you still have the industry that's taking place. How do you do that? Do you want to do that? That's a big question of planning. And what about green in the city? Philadelphia, being the poorest large city in the country, has some of the most unhealthy, poor neighborhoods anywhere in any urban environment. A study was done very recently that showed that people living in a wealthy zip code like 19106, Society Hill is in that zip code. The average lifespan there is about 88 years old. A few miles away in places like Kensington, the average lifespan was as low as maybe 78. Or 68, I actually think. 20-year differences in lifespans expected, you know, just like differing by zip code, differing by really by somebody's own, you know, economic state and health state. And where is all the green in the city? So as we can see, there's a whole lot of green here in a place that is not very accessible to the city, to the citizens right now. What kind of value does this have? To me, you almost can't put a value on having this amount of nature that nobody paid for, that planted itself up here, and it's here. You don't have nature in Center City unless you like find yourself in a little pocket park or something like that. It's all been converted to buildings, to housing, to office buildings, to stores, to restaurants. And yet here you have all this life growing up here. Really, really hard to cap a value on that. And then you have this transect going from Center City to shallow North Philadelphia, lined with green. You know, what a connector, what a green connector. So what do you do with that? Do you make it an upscale park, or do you make it something different? Check this tree out over here. So this is called an empress tree, or a paulownia. These trees are so big that they're growing at ground level in an abandoned lot. And so we're seeing basically the tops of the trees. These funky looking things that I'm looking at right now are last year's seed heads or seed pods. The paulownia is a tree from Asia, and inside, by the way, inside each one of these seed pods, they're all gone now, but each one of these things holds hundreds of tiny seeds that are really soft. They can fly in the air. They can find their way into the oh, there goes some. They can find their way into the tiniest crevices and germinate. So this is kind of like the non-native tree of Philadelphia. It can grow out of concrete, which is loaded with limestone. It doesn't need, like, look at these old seeds if they're showing up. It doesn't really need like highly nutritious soil. So there's still even some, look at that, you can catch that, but so that's what the seeds look like. Okay, so I'm planting paulownia as we speak. Well, how did this tree get here? Or how did these trees get here in such abundance? Well, one way is that back before there was styrofoam, packing material was often, it was made out of different things. Sometimes it was like a kind of a straw, dried grass. You know, salt hay was something that was used. But the seeds of paulownia, which were plentiful and really tiny, often were loaded into packages that were sent overseas. Those packages would come to the United States on a boat, and then to be transported into the States, they would find their way onto trains. And so it wasn't too infrequent that trains would go off the track and some boxcars would overturn. And when the boxcars overturned and the packages banged on the ground, it wasn't unusual when a whole lot of paulownia seeds then would just escape. Next thing you know, you got paulownias growing on railroad tracks and out of the cracks of the city. Talk about an entrepreneurial tree. Here, let me show you this, so that if you get a chance to see one of these things, you see these, oh, actually, we're because of the early spring, you're gonna get sort of a glimpse of what this looks like. But if this is showing up over here, like I hope it is, these fuzzy little heads here, these are this year's flower buds. And you can see there's a little bit of purple coming out. So that's telling me that, well, barring some cold weather, within about a week or so, I'm gonna be blinded by periwinkle here, light purple. These trees are absolutely gorgeous, and I like their smell as well. So are they kind of invasive? Yeah, they kind of are. But do they hold a lot of soil together, manage a lot of stormwater when it rains, provide a lot of shade in areas that have no trees otherwise? They do all that. So the Pollonia is a really interesting tree, and it's just about a week before it's going to be covered in beautiful light purple flowers. So we're making our way close to the southern end of the viaduct. Looks like somebody was up here with a weed whacker, go figure. Somebody cut the little blue stem down where we're walking. My guess is that somebody was shooting footage up here. Lots of people come up here and take advantage of the photogenic quality up here. And this area, which will, in a few weeks, it's going to be a lot greener, and in about a month it'll be back about 3 feet high across the board. But this is an area that had a lot of meadow plants. Somebody cut these down recently, and again, my guess is that it was for a maybe they were shooting something up here, picture-wise, I mean. So this is the old power station that powered the trains on this section of the viaduct until 1984. The story is that those people who kind of knew what was going on here, they knew what time the power was going to be shut off from this station and turned on to the station that you might be able to see through this fence over here, which is the lower down new power station. And whatever time that was, that's when the copper disappeared. Copper having, I guess, a lot of resale value. They shut the power off of this. This was, I guess, loaded with copper as part of the mechanisms that are required here. And some entrepreneurial people who knew what to do with the copper readily grabbed it and took it. So we won't expect to find much copper here, but we can find some really deep graffiti. So places like this are excellent to study, you know, just basically like, you know, human anthropology. It's not only what does nature do when an area gets abandoned, but, you know, what do people do with the area that's left? There's fodder for an amazing journal entry right there. So what we have here on the other side of this Corten steel, it looks like, gate, is a part that I always call the spur, but it's an open part of now what's called the rail park. It's maybe about a quarter-mile long. People taking pictures with the sun in the background, if you can see that. That you can go to on your own because it's totally accessible. I don't know if you can see through there. Swings that you can sit on, basically swinging benches. So one thing I will tell you about this, regardless of what anyone thinks of the aesthetic, this thing, just like the main stem of the viaduct, that thing was loaded with plants, just as much as the main stem. And there the designer decided to take them all out, and my understanding is that not a single plant that was growing there was saved to put back. And in our plant survey, that was the only place where we found, to my memory, something called purple coneflower, which is an amazingly beautiful plant, and to find that growing wild in the city is quite a treat. So an opportunity to save the nature that was there was skirted in favor of a highly designed park that does certainly get a lot of foot traffic. To me, I think it's a good first study of, do we want to follow that if we get access to redevelop this whole area, or could we do something different? How much of the wild can we preserve? Can we carve pathways within the wild? If for reasons of structural integrity or chemicals in the soils, if it's mandated that we have to remove most of the vegetation, what about taking the added expense of moving it with its roots and then replanting it? You just take this all and cut it down. the smell of flowers. Very welcome. So here we are. We're at the end of the southern end, that is, of the Reading Viaduct. Comes to this abrupt stop over here. Now, if you look straight ahead, you'll see some arches, okay? So you'll see straight ahead of where we're looking, 3 arches, light gray in color, probably a limestone facade, maybe concrete. In between the 2 on the right, you'll see another point of a domed structure. Has 2 little white smokestack looking objects on it. So that's the Reading Terminal, okay? That's the old 100-plus-year-old Reading Terminal, and that's where we're standing right now. Right up until 1984, trains shot across Vine Street that we're looking at right now and listening to, right into that terminal. You can still go there today. It's part of the convention center. You get some sense of what it was like, but it was flat out gorgeous, with skylights, a lot of wrought iron, very beautiful. Back when railroads had a lot of money to spend. And so back when they built this Vine Street Expressway, or this 676 spur that we're looking and listening to, it was decided that they had to take down what was left of the viaduct. And we're at a point where the Callow Hill section and Chinatown kind of merge, and connectivity between these areas and Center City is a challenge. And just think, if you still had this viaduct going across, if this ever does get rebuilt, it would be a great thing to recontinue, as much money as it would cost, a viaduct structure over this majorly wide set of lanes of Vine Street and Highway. So again, thinking about what we just walked through, what would you do if you were in charge here? So would you believe there are caves in the city? Here's one little section at grade level, and we're looking up at the viaduct. So this isn't a section that was built around 1912 or so. So the mortar that holds the big blocks of stone together, the bricks that are on the inside of this tunnel together, it's cement, it's concrete. What's concrete? It's largely calcium carbonate, limestone. So what we have, when 100 years go by and you get acid rain washing through, you get amazing formations, just the way you do in caves that occur in nature. So everything we're looking at here, minus the bag of dog do, is limestone that is precipitated out of the rock above to create these amazing patterns. So you don't have to go to Crystal Cave an hour and a half or so away to see amazing stalactites and columns and other things that spelunkers get all excited about. So as the Reading Viaduct slowly kind of erodes over time, you can see some of the natural processes that take place. This is actually limestone formation in progress. You can see the water dripping down. Let's see a stalactite at eye level. You can watch it. So what happens here? The water drips down, and you can see it at the tip of the calcium carbonate. And every time that drip drips, that water leaves a trace of limestone behind. And so every time a drip comes down and leaves the area, it lengthens the stalactite. It's literally building a stalactite while we're standing here. Now, if you didn't have this on the ground, you can see over here dripping on this old piece of asphalt. If nobody interfered with that, then you could get a stalagmite that would grow sticking up. But we don't have that opportunity here in the city. But again, where do you get to see stuff like this? And this beautiful limestone formation. Get a load of this column-like figure. You can see the brick up there and the stalactites. Remember, none of this was here in 1912. You had flush walls. All of this has come as water has drained through the Reading Viaduct over time. Here you see an old drainage pipe that goes all the way up. Even that has a stalactite dripping down, tinted by iron from the pipe, providing the water over here and providing, again, some iron color. Beautiful. Again, you don't need to go into nature to find nature. The city has its share of nature. Good night, mighty Polonias. And good night, resilient viaduct.